Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. The strange saga at Mercedes over the last few months continues, with Lewis Hamilton giving a latest perspective on the drama during the Singapore Grand Prix, the terrible strategy that cost him not just a chance of a podium, but of course dropped him way behind George Russell over the course of the Grand Prix. Hamilton was deeply frustrated and angry about, as he said himself, just a couple of days after the race. Now Hamilton has seemingly backed down in what some are seeing as a strange Mercedes PR move, trying to force their star driver into basically trying to admit this is not some sort of conspiracy against his performances this season. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into as always. Just one quick thing to mention first of all here on Ferrari. I shared this graphic very briefly yesterday, but didn't really discuss the full context of this because, well, Leclerc is right in the hunt for the championship if we'd only raced on street tracks, which, given the strengths of the Ferrari, and to be fair, the strengths of Charles around a circuit like Baku, maybe shouldn't be a massive surprise. But it is interesting, isn't it, that Verstappen and Norris are tied for most points on street tracks with 112. Leclerc's right there at 110, and if not for some incidents that happened during some of those Grand Prix earlier in the season, he could well have, been winning the street work championship effectively, right? But the Ferrari just hasn't been as good at regular tracks, and I think that is the key thing to look for going into the Austin Grand Prix. One among many, to be fair, is whether Ferrari can execute and keep up their trajectory they've had over the last few rounds, because, Baku, Singapore, arguably they could or should have won both of those weekends on pace earlier in the weekend. Singapore is probably out of reach, but certainly a better qualifying and a better race day performance could have been possible that weekend. And then obviously Baku was, well, maybe McLaren's car was slightly illegal with the rear wing that Oscar Piastri had, and so did Lando, to be fair, but of course that's now been outlawed by the FIA, or at least McLaren have admitted, okay, we'll take it off our car, it's alright guys. So Ferrari have done better over the last few rounds. They won Monza as well, but relatively extreme circuits they tend to be better on. Austin will be a key test for Ferrari as to whether they've actually made tangible progress with their car on more normal tracks. And if they have, Hamilton, I'm sure, and Vasseur and Leclerc will be very much happy about it going into next year. Lots going on at Red Bull, as ever. We did hear rumours a couple of days ago that Perez is planning to announce his retirement in Mexico. We saw this last year, so I'm definitely taking it with a pretty sizable pinch of salt this season, but it definitely raises questions on what Red Bull are going to do, which drivers they're looking at. We've obviously heard Christian Horner over the last few days talk about George Russell being available, and sure, he's doing a bit of flirting with Russell in the same way that Toto is still to this day flirting with Max Verstappen. But it's another classic Red Bull where Horner says one thing and Marko says the other. Horner says, yeah, we're looking at Russell. He's an option for 2026 potentially. And obviously that's interesting just because you're not going to put Russell and Verstappen together, are you? So as we theorised yesterday, is Russell a potential Verstappen candidate replacement if Max were to leave? But Marko says he's not on the radar. We're looking at our junior drivers or whatever. So, classic Red Bull shenanigans over there. He also did confirm, Marko, that the new head of strategy will be Hannah Schmitz, who some would have said was already the head of strategy, but she was, trackside director or whatever. She was the face of, anyway, their strategy department. And Will Courtenay, who was technically head of strategy, he's leaving to go to McLaren, of course. So, another big loss for Red Bull, but it does give them the opportunity to revitalise their organisation. Hannah Schmitz becoming the head of strategy, I think, is a really cool thing. And look, there are still good people at Red Bull. How many good people have they lost at Red Bull though? Quite a few as well, and that is the problem. And as Helmut says, it's a natural development. When you're successful, people are poached. Now, sure, people are poached, some have left. I mean, would Newey have left and been poached? Because Newey hasn't been poached, he decided to leave and then went elsewhere. Probably, to our understanding at least, very much in part due to the Horner scandal, right? So it's not just about people getting poached, but Helmut's right to some degree. There is someone with us though who can take over that position, and that's Hannah Schmitz, so that seems to be pretty much confirmed. He also talked a bit about Franco Colapinto. We know that Marko really loves, the younger drivers, and Colapinto coming in and impressing with Williams. As Marko says, I think he has a long-term deal with Williams and is definitely someone for the future. What he showed in Baku and Singapore was very, very good. And to be fair, he was good at Monza as well, but Monza, it's like an easy track really, right? It's only a few corners. Baku and Singapore are far more challenging for any driver, let alone a rookie who's only been in the sport a couple of rounds. Even Lando Norris, who was chilling out front with a 20-second lead, he was bidding it in the wall. Well, okay, he didn't bid it, you know what I mean? Made a couple of mistakes, and I think Nico Rosberg was very harsh on Lando, and understandably on the Sky F1 podcast the other day. but Colapinto kept it pretty clean, could have scored points, of course, in Singapore, had there'd been a crash up front or Norris crash or whatever, right? Then Colapinto would have scored. I think he was eventually 11th. And then Baku did score very sizable points and incredibly impressively so. So maybe someone that Marko's got to think about, because Colapinto was on Williams' radar, but wasn't really massively on anyone's radar until a few weeks ago. And now it is feasible that Red Bull are looking at their driver program. They're looking at maybe the lack of talent that they really have coming through. There's obviously some talent there, but there's no absolute superstars apart from maybe one or two that Red Bull have in the pipeline. And given that Colapinto is not getting a drive, we believe, on the grid next season, we're pretty sure he's not in the conversation for the Audi seat. He is, but they're probably going to give it to Bottas. So Colapinto won't be driving a Formula 1 car unless, in some hypothetical world, Danny Rick is gone, Lawson comes in for the next 6 rounds. Let's say Lawson does very well against Yuki, which I'd be surprised if he does. Yuki has actually kind of been the teammate destroyer in the last few years. De Vries axed, Daniel Ricciardo axed, and now he's coming for Liam Lawson's career potentially as well. But let's say Lawson does a great job for the rest of the season. They might give him the Red Bull drive. That's a possibility. And if they do, they need another driver for their other car. That could be, a Hadjar. Could be somebody else, but maybe they'd get Colapinto. Would that be a bad idea? Not as far as I'm concerned. And Arvid Lindblad has been very impressive for Red Bull, but, he's probably too young, probably too inexperienced to realistically get a Formula 1 drive over the next few years. He is 18 next, August, but even then, that, it's too much of a time frame, obviously, isn't it, to do anything in the near term. And Yuki Tsunoda continues to be like, what have I got to do, I suppose? And I guess there's been further questions on this. This is Yuki today or yesterday, I think in an event in Taiwan, they did actually with Red Bull, and does, a nice little donut here with the hearts coming through. There's actually a nice video of it right here from next to where this is all happening, and yeah, here's Yuki in an old school Red Bull doing some donuts, but it still never really seems likely that Tsunoda's going to get the drive at Red Bull. It seems more likely now, and we've probably known this for a few years, but it seems that Yuki is there to appease Honda, I guess is the way that I would see it, because I think Yuki's really good, and probably, I don't know if he's underrated. I think the fan base rates him probably about right. It's just Red Bull seem to underrate him, I guess would be my perspective. It doesn't seem like he's ever in the conversation to get promoted, and we know they've got their Honda relationship. Yuki, of course, understandably, Japanese driver, close with Honda, and that's why there's been theories that, let's say, Aston Martin either don't get Max or they do, and Alonso retires and Stroll is gone or whatever. Tsunoda might be a driver for them because they've got the Honda work still. That's an option. But I think that might just be what's going on here at Red Bull, really, rather than anything else. But let's talk about this Mercedes drama, because it just doesn't go away. Over the last couple of years, we've seen so much happen behind the scenes, it seems, at Mercedes. All sorts of interesting developments. Hamilton earlier in the season talking about tyre temperatures coming out of the box, implying that his team had his tyre, let's say, blankets, right, at a lower temperature than George's. And then there was this mysterious email that apparently went around to Mercedes staff saying that Hamilton was getting sabotaged, and then, the next weekend he had a podium or whatever. And there's been all sorts of stuff going on, kind of trying to explain maybe why Hamilton's qualifying performance hasn't been so good this season, why Mercedes have made some interesting strategic decisions with Hamilton this year. Let's say worse decision making than you might expect, and certain, even in Spa, when Russell was eventually disqualified, Hamilton was not informed that Russell was going to go for the one-stop strategy. Maybe it wasn't deemed worthwhile to tell him, but, it was just interesting the way that things have been managed, I think, this season. And on some sense, maybe it's expected. Russell is the new team leader, right, for next year. He will be leading this squad into what they hope will be a championship-winning season if they can get their car together. It's possible. It's not out of the realms of possibility. So they want to help George out. Lewis, I'm sure, has been excluded from team meetings for some time. So it's expected that Russell will probably have an uptick in performance this season, given that they knew Hamilton was departing from before the year even began. But nonetheless, some of the situations have been just strange. Not just the dynamic between Lewis and George, but the dynamic between Lewis and the team and George and the team, and it just feels like there's a bit more to this than meets the eye, but it's obviously very difficult to say. Anyway, the race happened this past weekend. Hamilton started on the soft rubber, as you guys can see in this image. We've got the red wall tyres. George is in the background with the yellow wall tyres on the mediums, because everyone else was running those, at least of the contenders, and Hamilton was forced to pit early, therefore, on the soft tyres. Probably pit earlier than he had to, really. He could have kept the tyres going longer, but George Russell would then be held up by his pace, and a bit awkward. They just decided, right, we're going to pull you in for the one stop. They even considered Mercedes going for the two stop, and they would have done for sure had there been a safety car or something. But the one stop was the strategy. They'd have lost. They wouldn't have gained any positions, is the point, if they pitted Hamilton towards the ends. So they just left him out there, and he had a massive tyre offset to his disadvantage, and everyone just flew past him from behind. Russell actually overcut him because Hamilton's stint lengths just didn't really make sense given what others were doing on the track, and the fact that the medium was the best tyre on the day by a mile, and Hamilton never ran the medium. So even during the Grand Prix, Hamilton was frustrated. He was on the radio saying what sounded like, "Sometimes I wonder why I do this," and clearly the frustration was setting in during the race. The interesting part, though, was after the race ended, Hamilton and Russell never showed up for the press conference because they were borderline overheating, their borderline heat stroke, according to Toto Wolff. So they stepped out of that one. But a couple of days later, Hamilton and Russell had some events going on with, I think, Petronas for their 50-year thing, kind of in collaboration with why they did the special livery in Singapore. And Hamilton was pretty, clear on his perspective on why this was a problem. "I was perplexed by the strategy. It didn't make sense to me, and so I battled as hard as I could to fight to go on the medium tyre, but the team continued to suggest that I start on the soft, and when they took the tyre blankets off, everyone was on mediums. I was so angry. Already from that moment I was frustrated," and Russell said, "As soon as I saw that, I knew that Lewis wouldn't be happy." And this was just the full quote with the final part where he says, "I was so angry. Already from that moment I was frustrated, and then I tried my best to keep up with the guys ahead. They were too fast. I tried to make the tyre last as long as I could. I knew when I stopped that the race was done for me because the hard tyre was going to be a struggle in the heat." So Hamilton was pretty blunt after the race that he was angry, he was frustrated with the decision that Mercedes made for him, it seems, and Mercedes themselves admitted they made a mistake. Allison says, for various reasons, we thought we could maybe jump the guys ahead on the soft tyre at the start. We thought we had more pace than we did. And even though, as Allison even admitted, they struggle with the tyre degradation and keeping the tyres in the right window at circuits such as these, but yet they still thought it was worthwhile putting Hamilton on the soft tyre. It's a questionable decision at the very least. And Mercedes made it very clear, we shouldn't have started on the soft tyres. It was a mistake. If we could turn back time, we would have done something differently. And I don't personally believe the idea that, they've deliberately sabotaged Hamilton. At the end of the day, they are fighting for championship position. The reality is they're going to be fourth in this year's championship race because Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren are all going to finish ahead of them based on the way that things stand, which is not what they want to be. It's where maybe some Mercedes fans might be because they're going to get more wind tunnel testing time for next season and potentially beyond as well. But it's difficult to come up with a great motive as to why Mercedes would sabotage Hamilton deliberately. You can understand why they might want to, favour Russell on strategy or certain things like that, but to, deliberately sabotage Hamilton's race and effectively mandate that he's going to drop down the grid by putting him on the inferior strategy, I believe that Mercedes thought that was either the best option or was definitely a candidate to be the best option. They were wrong, and obviously it reflected badly on the team at the end of the day. I don't think Mercedes are trying to make Hamilton fail because it's difficult to understand what the benefit of that exactly would be unless they want to destroy his confidence before he goes to Ferrari or increase Russell's confidence before he goes to become the team leader at Mercedes. But, it's still got to be said, there have been some interesting decisions made by Mercedes that you wouldn't necessarily have expected to see over the last few years. Today then, Hamilton comes out with an Instagram post, or this is at least on his story, explaining in more detail what's going on, and I just found this all rather interesting, to be honest, with what's happening lately, because as he says the following: "Hey all, heading into the weekend, focus on training for the next race in Austin. I know there has been a lot of chat around the last one on our strategy in Singapore, which just didn't work. When that happens, it's natural to be frustrated and easy for me to speak out in that frustration," which is fair enough and true. But usually that would happen, the minutes after the race, not 2 days later in a fan interaction. And sure, Hamilton was pretty, warm and cordial when he was saying those things that he said, but still, he'd had time to reflect and consider, and he still said that he was angry and frustrated at what was going on, certainly at the time.
Well, we sat in our meeting in the morning of the race. Actually, the night before, they already mentioned that they would like to split the cars. And for me, I was a bit perplexed by it because in the past, when we've ever been in that position, normally if George has qualified well like he normally does and I'm out of the top 10 or something, then we would split the strategies. But when we were so close, it didn't make sense to me. And so I battled as hard as I could to fight to go on the medium tyre, but the team continued to suggest that I start on the soft. And then when they took the tyre blankets off and everyone was on mediums, I was like...
When I saw that, I was thinking, Lewis won't be happy.
So angry. And already from that moment, I'm frustrated. And then I tried my best to keep up with the guys ahead. They were too fast. And then I just tried to make that tyre last as long as I could. And I had to stop on lap 17. And I knew from that moment, then the race was done for me, because the hard tyre was going to be a struggle in that heat. And we've been struggling with the balance of the car all weekend, so we've been changing so many different things. But we got a good qualifying, but unfortunately the race was a bit too much of a struggle for us.
He says, we knew starting on the soft tyres was a bold and risky move, but one that could give us an advantage at the start. And ultimately, I agreed with that recommendation. So this is, I think, the clarification that either Hamilton himself or Mercedes PR team wanted him to provide. Because the other day, he said, the team wanted me to do this, I fought against it, and they told me, no, you're doing it, and therefore we did it. Hamilton now says, well, they told me to do it, I wasn't sure, but eventually I agreed and said, all right, let's do it, it's worth a go, I see what you're saying type thing. And those situations are slightly different, right, which is fair enough. And as he says, we also miscalculated what others might do. But it's just a bit confusing why this needs to be said. To be honest, lots of people never even saw his comments. This was, only people that really follow the scene closely would have even seen these comments. It wasn't in a public press conference or anything like that. It wasn't reported on really by many major publications. It was mentioned, but it wasn't like a massive deal at the time. We talked about it a few days ago, of course, but it wasn't exactly major front page news. But either Hamilton himself has decided, all right, well, maybe what I said was unfair, I want to clarify, or possibly more likely, Mercedes have said, hey, Lewis, this is reflecting badly on us. We want you to say this, which is, it's interesting, isn't it? And as he says, make no mistake, though, things are cool with the team. So even this is kind of implying that there's been some speculation or some theories that Hamilton's frustrated with the way that things are going. I don't know. As with all successful partnerships, you have some lows to have the highs. We're not afraid of those tricky conversations and challenging moments, which is why we've achieved so much together. We will support each other to the ends. It's all love. See you in Austin, he says. So, what do you guys think about this? I mean, did Hamilton write this? Probably. But did he write this with some coercion? Also possibly. I mean, people were obviously quote tweeting it, saying, Lewis, while this is being written, among other very entertaining tweets in the timeline today. And, the whole make no mistake, I thought was pretty interesting too. Confusing what's happening at Mercedes, I'm not going to lie. And I don't exactly know what to read into it. Even Mercedes themselves today say, our journey together started 12 years ago, couldn't have imagined where it would take us. So it's just all these things aligned, isn't it? Mercedes doing a nice post for Hamilton saying our final 6 races, Hamilton making this statement kind of backing down on what he said following the Singapore Grand Prix, defending the team, and maybe I get that, but the reality is that people had moved on, right? I mean, people had talked about it, the potential, what Mercedes were playing at, why they put them on the soft tyres, people talked about it, he talked about it, people have moved on, right? It is what it is. People are talking on other things, Red Bull, whatever, and then Hamilton brings it back in. So now people are talking about it more, and there's more discussion on what Mercedes did and what they did wrong or whatever. So I'm not exactly sure it helps Mercedes' case, to be honest, if they have asked Lewis to do this, or maybe Hamilton just wanted to, for whatever reason you might decide. So quite fascinating. It's just a strange environment there at Mercedes. It's got to be, because it feels it from the outside. And of course, Hamilton will be looking forward to, I'm sure now, going over to Fred versus Ferrari, which is not happening in the all too distant future. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.